The swimmer. It was one of those midsummer Sundays when everyone sits around saying, I drank too much last night. You might have heard it whispered by the parishioners leaving church, heard it from the lips of the priest himself, struggling with his cassock in the vestibarium, heard it from the golf links and the tennis courts, heard it from the wildlife preserve where the leader of the Audiobook group was suffering from the terrible hangover. I drank too much, said Donald Westerhazy. We all drank too much, said Lucinda Merrill. It must have been the wine, said Helen Westerhazy. I drank too much of that claret. It was at the edge of the Westerhazy's pool. The pool, fed by an artesian well with a high iron content, was a pale shade of green. It was a fine day. In the west there was a massive stand of cucumbers called so that the city seems from the distance, from the bow of an approaching ship, that it might have had a name. Lisbon, Hackensack. The sun was hot. Dandy Merrill sat by the green water, one hand in it, one around a glass of gin. He was a slender man. He seemed to have the especial slenderness of youth, and while he was far from young, he had slid down his banister that morning, and given the bronze backside of Aphrodite on the hall table a meg, as he jogged toward the smell of coffee in his dining room. He might have been compared to the summer's day, particularly the last hours of one, and while he lacked a tennis racket or sailbag, the impression was definitely one of youth, sport, and climate weather. He had been swimming, and now he was breathing deeply, stertorously, as if he had gulped into his lungs a component of that moment, the heat of a sound, the intenseness of his pleasure. It all seemed to flow into his chest. His own house stood in Bowlet Park, 8 miles to the south, where his four beautiful daughters would have had their lunch and might be playing tennis. Then it occurred to him that by taking a dog leg to the southwest he could reach his home by water. His life was not confined, and the delight he took in this observation could not be explained by its suggestion of escape. He seemed to see, with a cartographer's eyes, that streams of swimming pools, that quasi-subterranean streets that curved across the county. He had made a discovery, a contribution to modern geography. He would name the stream Lucinda after his wife. He was not a practical joker, nor was he a fool, but he was determinedly original and had a vague and modest idea of himself as a legendary figure. The day was beautiful, and it seemed to him that the long swim might enlarge and celebrate its beauty. He took off a sweater that was hung over his shoulders and dove in. He had an inexplicable con- con- contempt for men who did not hurl themselves into pools. He swam a choppy crawl, breathing either with every stroke or every full stroke, and counting somewhere well in the back of his mind the 1-2-1-2 of a flutter kick. It was not a serviceable stroke for long distance, but the domestication of swimming had saddled the sport with some custom, and in his part of the world a cure was customary. To be embraced and sustained by the light green water was then a pleasure. It seemed then the resumption of the natural condition, and he would have liked to swim without trunks. But this was not possible, considering his project. He hoisted himself up on the far curb, he never used a ladder, and started across the lawn, When Lucinda asked where he was going, he said he was going to swim home. The only maps and trails he had to go by were remembered or imaginary, but these were clear enough. First, there were the Grahams, the Hammers, the Lears, the Howlands, and the Crococks. He would cross the demonstrate to the bunkers and come after short portage to the levees, the Wiltshires, and the public pool in Lancaster. Then there were the Hallorans, the Sedges, and Biswangers, surely the Adams, the Gilmartin, and the Clydes. The day was lovely, and that he lived in the world so generously supplied with water seems like a clemency, a beneficence. His heart was high, and he ran across the grass. Making his way home by an uncommon route gave him the feeling that he was a pilgrim, an explorer, a man with a destiny, and he knew that he would find friends all along the way. Friends would line the banks of the Lucinda River. He went through the hedge that separated the West Hesse's land from the Granthams, walked under the flowering apple trees, past the shed that housed their pump and filter, and camped out at the Graham's pool. "Why, Neddy," Mr. Graham said, "what a marvelous surprise! I've been trying to get you on the phone all morning. Here, let me get you the drink." He saw land like any explorer, that the hospitable customs and traditions of the natives would have to be handled with diplomacy if he was ever going to reach his destination. He did not want to mystify or seem rude to Graham's, nor did he have the time to linger there. He swam the length of their pool and joined them in the sun and was rescued a few minutes later by the arrival of two carloads of friends from Connecticut. During the uproarious reunions he was about to slip away. He went down by the front of the Graham's house, stepped over the thorny hedge, and crossed the vacant lot to the Hammers. Mistress Hammers, looking up from her roses, saw him swim by, although she wasn't quite sure who it was. The deer heard him splashing past the open windows of their living room. The Howlands and the Crosscop were away. After leaving the Howlands, he crossed Dimmer Street and started for the bunkers, where he could hear, even at a distance, the noise of parting. The water refracted the sounds of voices and laughter, and seemed to suspend it in mid-air. The bunkers boat was on the rise, and he climbed some stairs to a terrace where 25 or 30 men and women were drinking. The only person in the water was Rusty Towers, who floated there on a rubber raft. Oh, how bonny and lost were the banks of the Lucinda River! Prosperous men and women gathered by the sapphire-colored water, while caterers men in white coats passed them coaching. Overhead, a red Haviland channel was circling around and around and around in the sky, with something like the gleam of a child in the swing. Ned felt passing affection for the things, a tenderness for the gathering as if it was something he might touch. In the distance he heard the sounder. As soon as Annette Bunker saw him, she began to scream. "Oh, look who's here! What a marvelous surprise! When Lucinda said that you couldn't come, I thought I'd died." She made her way to him through the crowd, and When they finished the and when they finished kissing, he led him to the bar, a progress that was slowed by the fact that he stopped to kiss 8 or 10 other women and shake the hands of as many men. A smiling bartender he had seen at the hundred parties gave him a gin and tonic, and he stood by the bar for a moment, anxious not to get stuck in any conversation that would delay his voyage. When he seemed about to be surrounded, he dove in and swam close to the side to avoid colliding with Rusty's raft. At the far end of the port, he bypassed the Thompsons with a broad smile and jogged up the garden path. The gravel cut his feet, but this was the only unpleasantness. The party was confined to the pool, and as he went toward the house, he heard the brilliant, watery sounds of voice fed, hearing the noise of radio from the bunkers catching, where someone was listening to the ball game. Sunday afternoon, he made his way through the parked cars and down the grassy border of the driveway to Edelweib's Lane. He did not want to be seen on the road in his bathing trunk, but there was no traffic, and he made a short distance to the Levis driveway, marked with "Private Property" sign and a green tube for the New York Times. All the doors and windows of the big house were open, but there were no signs of life, not even a dog barked. He went around the side of the house to the pool and saw that Levis had only recently left. Glasses and bottles and dishes of nuts were on the table at the deep end, where there was a bathhouse for Gaspar, hung with Japanese lanterns. After swimming in the pool, he got himself a glass and poured a drink. It was his fourth or fifth drink, and he had swum nearly half the length of the Lucinda River. He felt tired, clean, and pleased at that moment to be alone, pleased with everything. It would storm. The stand of cumulus cloud, that city, had risen and darkened, and while he sat there he heard the percussiveness of thought again. The the Havilland trainer was still circling overhead, and it seemed to Ned that he could almost hear the pilot laugh with pleasure in the afternoon. But when there was another peal of thunder, he took off for home. A train whistle blew, and he wondered what time it had gotten to be. 4, 5. He thought of the provincial station at that hour, with a waiter, his tuxedo concealed by a raincoat, a draped with some flowers wrapped in a newspaper, and a woman who had been crying could be waiting for the local. It was suddenly growing dark. It was that moment when a pink-headed bird seemed to organize their song into some acute and knowledgeable recognition of the storm's approach. Then there was a fine noise of rushing water from the crown of the oak at his back, as if a spigot there had been turned. Then the noise of fountain came from the crowns of all the tall trees. Why did he love storms? What was the meaning of his excitement when the door sprang open and the rain wind fled rudely up the stairs? Why had the steam protest of shutting the windows of an old house seemed fitting and urgent? Why did the first watery notes of the storm wind have for him the unmistakable sound of good news, cheer, glad, tenderness, tenderness? Then there was an explosion, a smell of cordite, and Wren lashed the Japanese lantern that Mr. Levy had brought in Kyoto the years before last. Or was it the year before last? He stayed, he stayed in Levy's Gaspar until the storm had passed. The rain had cooled the the air and he shivered. The force of the wind had stripped the maple of its red and yellow leaves and scattered them over the grass and the water. Since it was midsummer, the tree must be blighted, and yet he felt a peculiar sadness at the sight of autumn. He brushed his shoulders, emptied his glass, and started for the vulture's pool. This moment across this meant crossing the landless riding ring, and he was surprised to find it overgrown with grass and all the jumps mismantled. He wondered if landless had sold their horses or gone away for the summer and put them out to board. He seemed to remember having heard something about landless and their horses, but the memory was unclear. On his went barefoot through the wet grass to the waters, where he found their pool was dry. This splash in his can of water disappointed him absurdly, and he felt like some explorer who sees the torrential headwater and finds a dead stream. He was disappointed and mystified. It was common enough to go away for the summer, but no one ever drained his pool. The vultures had definitely gone away. The pool furniture was folded, stacked, and covered with a tarpaulin. The bed house was locked. All the windows of the house were shut, and when he went around the driveway in front, he saw a for sale sign nailed to the tree. When had he last heard from the Welchers? When, that is, had he and Lucinda last regretted an invitation to dine with them? It seemed only a week or so ago. Was his memory failing, or had he so disciplined it in the repression of unpleasant facts, and he had damaged his sense of the truth? Then, in the distance, he heard a sound of a tennis game. It just him, cleared away all his apprehensions, and let him regard the overcast sky and the cold air with indifference. It was the day that Daddy Muriel swam across the county. That was the day he started off the land for his most difficult project. Had you gone for the Sunday afternoon ride that day, you might have seen him, close connected, standing on the shoulders of Route 424, waiting for the chance to cross. You might have wondered if he was the victim of a foul play and his car broken down, or was he merely a fool, standing barefoot in the deposits of the highway, beer cans, rags, and blowout patches, exposed, exposed to all kinds of ridicule. He seems pitiful. He had known when he started that this was a part of his journey. It had been on his maps. But confronted with these lines of traffic roaming through the summery light, he found himself unprepared. He was laughed at, jeered at, and a beer can was thrown at him, and he had no dignity or humor to bring to the situation. He could have gone back to the western houses, where Lucinda was still sitting in the sun. He had signed nothing, vowed nothing, pledged nothing, not even to himself. Why, believing as he did that all men obduracy was susceptible to common sense, was he unable to turn back? Why was he determined to complete his journey even if it meant putting his life in danger? And at what point had this prank, this joke, this piece of horseplay become serious? He could not go back. He could not even recall with any clearness the green water at Western Houses, the sense of inhaling the gas component, the friendly and relaxed voices, saying that they had drunk too much. In the space of an hour, more or less, he had covered a distance that made his return impossible. An old man, strolling down the highway at 15 miles an hour, letting him get to the middle of the road, where there was a grass divider. Here he was exposed to the ridiculous of the northbound traffic, but after 10 or 15 minutes he was about to cross. For here he had only a short walk to the recreation center at the edge of the village of Lancaster, where there were some handball courts and public pool. The effect of the water on voices, the illusion of brilliance and suspense, was the same here as it had been at the bunkers, but the sounds here were louder, harsher, and more shrill. And as soon as he entered the crowded enclosure, he was confronted with the regimentation. All swimmers must take a shower before using the pool. All swimmers must use the foot bath. All swimmers must wear their identification discs. He took the shower, washed his feet in the cloudy and better solution, and made his way to the edge of the water. Instead of chlorine and looked to him like the sea. A pair of lifeguards in the pair of tall blue police pistols at what seemed to be regular intervals and abused the swimmers through the public address system. Neddy remembered the sapphire water at the bunkers, was lonely and thought that he might contaminate himself, damage his own prosperousness and charm by swimming in his murk, but he reminded himself that he was an explorer, a pilgrim, and that this was merely a stagnant bend in the Lucinda River. He dove, squirming with distaste, into the chlorine and had to swim with his head above the water to avoid collisions. But even so, he was bumped into, splashed, and jostled. When he got to the swallow, to when he got to the shallow end, both lifeguards were shouting at him, "Hey, you! Without an identification disc, get out of the water!" He did. But they had no way to persuade him, and he went through the red of suntan oil and coloring out through the hurricane fence and past the handball court. By crossing the road, he entered the wooded part of the Halloween estate. The woods were not treed, and the footing was treacherous and difficult until he reached the lawn and the clipped beach hedge that encircled their pool. The heroines were friends, an elder, an elderly couple of enormous wealth, which seemed bask in the suspicions that they might be communists. They were zealous reformers, but they were not communists. And yet, when they were accused, as they sometimes were, of of subversion, it seemed to gratify and excite them. The beach head was yellow, and he guessed that this had been belighted like the Davis maple. He called "Hello, hello" to warn the Halloweens of his approach, to palliate his invasion of their privacy. The Halloweens, for reasons that had never been explained to him, did not wear bathing suits. No explanation were in order, really. Their nakedness was a detail in their uncompromising zeal for reform, and he stepped politely out of his trunk before he went through the opening of the hedge. Mr. Harrowin, a astute woman with white hair and a thin face, was reading the Times. Mr. Harrowing was taking beach leaves out of the water with a scoop. They seemed not surprised or displeased to see him. Liverpool was perhaps the oldest in the country, the fieldstone rectangle, filled by a brook. It had no filter or pump, and its water was an opaque, opaque, opaque gold end the stream of the stream. I'm swimming across the county, Dad said. Why, I didn't know one could, explained Mr. Halloran. Well, I've met it from the Western Hussey, Ned said. That must be about 4 miles. He left his rod at the dip walked to the shallow end and swam his dress. As he was pulling himself out of the water, he heard Mr. Halloran say, We have been terribly sorry to hear about all your misfortune, Daddy. My misfortunes? Daddy asked. I don't know what you mean. Why, we heard that you'd sold the house and left your poor children. I don't regret having sold the house, Dad said, and the girls are at home. Yes, Mr. Halloran said, cited. Yes. Her voice filled the air with an unseasonable melancholy, and Ned spoke briskly. Thank you for your swim. We'll have a nice trip, said Mr. Halloran. Beyond the hedge he pulled on his rod and fastened them. They were loose, and he wondered if, during the pass of an afternoon, he could have lost some wet. He was cold and he was tired, and the naked Halloran and the dark water had distracted him. The swim was too much for his strength, but how could he have guessed this, sliding down the banister, that burning and sitting in the western house's sun? His arms were lame, his legs felt rubbery and ached at the joints. The worst of it was the cold in his bones and the feeling that he must never be warm again. Leaves were falling down around him, and he smelled the wood smoke on the wind. Who would be burning wood at this time of year? He needed a drink. Whiskey would warm him, pick him up, carry him through the last of his journey, refresh his feeling that it was original and valorous to swim across the county. Channel swimmers took brandy. He needed a stimulant. He crossed the lawn in front of the Halloran's house and went down the little path to where they built a house for their only daughter, Helen, and her husband, Eric Satch. The Satch's porch was small, and he found Helen and her husband there. Oh, Daddy, Helen said, did you lunch at Mother's? Not really, Ned said. I did stop to see your parents. This seems to be explanation enough. I'm terribly sorry to break in on you like this, but I've taken a chill and I wondered if you gave me a drink. Why, I'd love to, Helen said, but there hasn't been anything in this house to drink since Eric's observation. That was 3 years ago. Was he losing his memory? Had his gifts of consoling painful facts let him forget that he had sold his house, that his children were in trouble, and that his friends had been ill? His eyes slipped from Eric's face to his abdomen, where he saw 3 pale, sutured scars, 2 of them at least a foot long. Gone was his devil's end. What Daddy thought with a roving hand, checking one's gifts at 3 a.m., backing off an belly with an
with no needle, no lecture brush, no lecture burst, this brush in the succession. I'm sure you can get a drink at the Beeswaggers, Helen said. They're having an enormous dew. You can hear it from here. Listen. She raised her head in from across the road, the lawns, the gardens, the woods, the fields. The fields. He heard again the brilliant noise of voices over water. Well, I'll get wet, he said, still feeling that he had no freedom of choice about his means of travel. He dove into Satch's cold water, and gasping, close to drowning, made his way from the one end of the pool to the other. Lucinda and I went terribly to see you, he said over his shoulder, his face set toward the Beeswangers. We're sorry it's been so long and we'll call you very soon. He crossed some fields to the Beeswangers and the sound of the revelry there. They would be honored to give him a drink. They would be happy to give him a drink. The Beeswangers invited him and Lucinda for dinner 4 times a year, 6 weeks in advance. They were always rebuffed, and yet they continued to send out their invitations, unwilling to comprehend the rigid and undemocratic realities of their society. They were the sort of people who discussed the price of things at Lockdale, exchanging market tips during dinner, and after dinner told dirty stories to mix company. They did not belong to Natty set. They were not even on Lucinda's Christmas card list. He went toward their pools with feelings of indifference, charity, and some unease, since it seemed to be getting dark and these were the longest days of the year. The party when he joined it was noisy and large. Grace Wagner was the kind of hostess who asked the optometrist, the veterinarian, the real estate dealer, and the dentist. The one was swimming, and the twilight, reflected on the water of the pool, had a wintry gleam. There was a bar, and he started for this. When Grasp's mistress saw him, she came toward him, not affectionately, as he had every right to expect, but bellicosely. Why, this party has everything, she said loudly, including a cat crusher. She would not deal him a social blow. There was no question about this, and he did not flinch. As a cat crusher, he asked politely, "Do I rent a drink?" "Suit yourself," she said. "You don't seem to pay much attention to invitations." She turned her back on him and joined some guests, and he went to the bar and ordered a whiskey. The bartender served him, but he served him rudely. His was a mood in which the caterer's man kept the social score, and to be rebuffed by the part-time barkeep meant that he had suffered some dose of social esteem. For or perhaps the man was new and uninformed. Then he heard Grass at his back said, "They went for broke overnight, nothing but income, and he showed up drunk on Sunday and asked us to loan him $5,000. She was always talking about money." It was worse than eating your pit of a knife. He dove into the pool, swam its length, and went away. The next pool on his list, the last but two, belonged to his old mistress, Shirley Auden. If he had suffered any injuries at Peacemakers, they would be cured here. Love, sexual roughhouse, in fact, was the supreme was a supreme elixir, the painkiller, the brightly colored pill that would put the spring back into his step, the joy of life in his heart. They had had an affair last week, last month, last year. He couldn't remember. It was he who had broken it off. He was the Abraham, and he stepped through the gates of the world that surrounded her pool with nothing so considered as self-confidence. It seemed in a way to be his pool, as a lover, particularly the illicit lover, enjoys the possession of his mistress with an authority unknown to holy matrimony. She was there, her hair the color of brass, but her fingers at the edge of the delighted, cerebral water excited in him no profound memories. It had been, he thought, a light, a light-hearted affair. Also, she had wept when he brought it off. He seemed, she seemed to, she seemed confused to see him, and he wondered if she was still wounded. Would she, God forbid, weep again? What do you want? She asked. I'm, I'm swimming across the county. Good Chris, will you ever grow up? What's the matter? If you come here for money, she said, I won't give you another cent. You could give me a drink. I could, but I won't. I'm not alone. Well, I'm on my way. He dove in and swam the pool, but when he tried to haul himself up onto the curb, he found that the strength in his arms and shoulders had gone, and he paddled to the ladder and climbed out. Looking over his shoulder, he saw, in the lighted bathhouse, a young man. Going out onto the jog lawn, he smelled chrysanthemums or marigold, some stubborn autumnal fragrance, and the night air strong as gas. Looking overhead, he saw that the stars had come out, but why should he seem to see Andromeda, Cephus, and Cassiopeia? What had be, what had become of the constellations of the midsummer? He began to cry. It was probably the first time in his adult life that he had ever cried. Certainly the first time in his life that he had ever felt so miserable, cold, tired, and bewildered. He could not understand the rudeness of the caterers, barkeeps, or the rudeness of the mistress who had come to him on her knees and showered his trousers with tears. He had swam too long, he had been immersed too long, and his nose and his throat were sore by the water. What he needed then was a drink, some company, and some clean, dry clothes, and while he could have cut directly across the road to his home, he went onto the Gilbertons' pool. Here, for the first time in his life, he did not dive but went down the step into the ice water and swam a hobble side stroke that he might have learned as a youth. He staggered with fatigue on his way to the Clydes and paddled the length of their pool, stopping again and again. With his hand on the curb to rest, he climbed up the ladder, and wondered if he had the strength to get home. He had done what he wanted. He had swum the county, but he was so stupefied with exhaustion that his strength seemed vague. Stooped, holding on the gas post for support, he turned up the driveway on his own house. The place was dark. Was it so late that they had all gone to bed? Had Lucinda stayed at the Western Houses for supper? Had the girls joined there or gone someplace else? hadn't let great hadn't let agree as they usually did on Sunday to regret earlier invitation and stay at home. He tried the garage doors to see what clothes were in, but the doors were locked and Ross came off the handles onto his hands. Going toward the house, he saw that the force of the thunderstorm had knocked one of the rain gauges loose. It hung down over the front doors like an umbrella rib, but it could be fixed in the morning. The house was locked, and he thought that the stupid cook or the stupid maid must have locked the place up until he remembered that it had been some time since they had employed a maid or a cook. He shouted, pounded on the door, tried to force it with his shoulder, and then looking in at the windows. That the place was empty.